What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Pilsners and Prelims. This is Andy alongside my friend here, Rick, aka Samurai Ghost, for this one. We'll be previewing the UFC Fight Night between Allen and Craig. Super excited about this one, Rick. Not just for that fight, but also for the other ones that are going to be featured on the main card. Another fight that I'm really excited about on this card is the Jordan Leavitt and Chase Hooper fight. The casual MMA fan, or casual UFC fan rather, may not necessarily know what's about to happen in this fight, but for those of you that have been following Jordan Leavitt and Chase Hooper for some time now, you know it's going to be absolutely nuts on the mat. Some of the other ones I'm super excited about too. I really am looking forward to the Nick Aguirre and Payton Talbott fight. Payton Talbott's coming in off of that Dana White Contender Series fight, and Nick Aguirre is coming off of one feature in the UFC where he came in on short notice and lost. So he's here to redeem himself off super tall odds too. You would look at the odds for that one in the main event and think, gee, how does the dog even have a chance? Well, we'll be telling you a little bit more about that. Just touching on the UFC 295 real quick. Any thoughts there on how the last card went before you want to talk about this card?
Yeah, so I'm excited for this card as well, and I'll get to this card in a second. But UFC 295, I thought really you can't really exceed expectations, but I thought it was damn close. I mean, both title fights for as long as they lasted were entertaining, and I felt like there was a clear winner in both. Like there wasn't any doubt left in anyone's mind. There wasn't a decision. Like it was clear. Like X is better than Y. Like I'm blanking on fighter names at the moment as I'm thinking about this card, but. Like Alex Pereira is much better, or not much better, but he got the best of Yuri Prochazka, and same with the co-main as well. I mean, like it was a good card where there was a lot of finishes, and I was able to sweep the main card. So hopefully we can do that again this week as well. All right, and to summarize the UFC 295 card as it was. We finished and we swept the main card at 5-0, plus 5.75 units, which fantastic way to end the main card. Hit on every single fight, went 1-0 on each fight. Lopez, Saint Denis inside the distance, Andrade straight up, Aspinall straight up, Pereira straight up. So 5-0 on the main card. Unfortunately, the prelims weren't as kind to us. 3-4-1 on the prelims, ending me at 8-4-1. Up 5.32 units. So quite the main card for me, quite the entire card in general. And that brings us net to about just under a unit lost. So a bad 294 in Fight Night for me, but made up for it. And looks like we'll be able to continue to cash here moving forward. So, Andy, how about you? How did UFC 295 end up treating you?
Yeah, Rick, so I also had a successful UFC 295. Starting off with the main card, I went 4-1, so not as perfect as your 5-0, but my one miss being the Tommy Aspinall and Sergey Pavlovich fight, not making it past one round. Honestly, I still jumped out of my seat and cheered when the bet lost, so was super fired up for Tommy Aspinall that he got the interim belt. Couldn't happen for a better guy and a better story. That being said, it was only a 1-unit loss. The rest of my wins with the big Andrade win at plus 165 for a unit and a half, as well as another with Alex. On his money line, I put a unit and a half too. So totaled up to plus 4.975 units. So almost 5 units of profit on the main card. It makes up for my losses on the prelims. I did not have a single win on the prelims from a betting standpoint. Lost on Borjas, lost on Kong, and lost on Gordon with the Sadikov push, as well as I told you guys I was going to provide Ursig as a parlay leg. And I never gave a second leg, so I'm not going to count that as a win. So I realized that after the podcast came out, I was like, holy shit, I never gave a second leg. But yeah, it's a huge main card for both you and I. 5-0 to Rick, 4-1 to me. Super pumped, hoping that we can roll that same luck right into the UFC Fight Night coming up this weekend. But from a pick standpoint, Rick, how do we do for actually picking the fights as a whole?
And as far as records go, as far as picking the straight, who wins the fight, I ended up going 10-2 on UFC 295. Andy going 9-3, with our one difference being Tabitha Ricci and Lupi Godinez. That brings our overall record since we started a few fight nights ago to Andy at 18-10-2, and myself at 28-2. And Ben, behind the scenes, I've got you at 0-1, picking Prochazka with your only official pick. So all good by us, doing pretty well, and hope to continue the winning ways. We'll be covering the main card, all 6 fights on the main card, as well as just a couple on the prelims. Picking a couple of our favorite fights off the prelims. There's some dodgy prelims here with some debuting fighters, some fighters that are struggling, and we'll get to a couple of our favorites. And throughout the week, make sure to be following us on Twitter as a shameless plug, but at Rick HH Sports and at Andy HH Sports for the other fights. We might have some plays throughout the week, but nothing that I'm looking to lock in right now. And yeah, so make sure to follow there, but. Definitely some fun fights across the prelims and main card here. Definitely feels like a fall off as far as quality goes, as far as top end. But there are some decent prospects, as you mentioned. Payton Talbott making his UFC debut at 6-0. Not every day you see a 6-0 and a 7-1 UFC fighter on the main card. So a little bit different, but should be exciting. Amanda Ribas back in action after getting knocked out again. So we'll talk about that, as well as the main event. We haven't spoken about that yet, but Brendan Allen and Paul Craig. We all know how Paul Craig fights are going to go, one way or another, but it never goes to decision. So we'll at least get one finish there, and we're guaranteed of that. And if we're not, then you guys can all berate me on social media. So.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this one because I feel like there's a lot of value on dogs. We saw me cash in on a pretty big dog play with Jessica Andrade at plus 165 on the UFC 295 card. She closed at plus 190, so hopefully you guys heard me say that later and got better value than what I was able to lock in on the pod. But yeah, she had a dominant performance in UFC 295. Had another unit and a half play cash on Pareda as well. So a really solid UFC 295 card that we're looking to roll straight into this UFC fight night before we have a week off next week because there's no UFC card. So we'll pick right back up at the beginning of December, or I guess end of November rather is when the podcast would release for that that UFC fight night that I believe is in Austin, Texas, to close the year for the fight nights. That is because they head out to Shanghai and then they've got the pay-per-view that closes the year. So only 3 cards left after this one. Excited to close out in November with a bang though, and get you all started with the first prelim that we have selected, which is Charles Johnson taking on Rafael Estevam. Stay tuned with us as we go ahead and break down a couple of the prelims that Rick and I have our eye on this week. And kicking off this UFC fight night, we have Charles Johnson at 13-5 taking on Rafael Estevam, who has an unbeaten record at 11-0, but is on his UFC debut. So Estevam won on Contender Series in 2022, but ended up having 2 canceled bouts since. He fought in the Brazilian promotion Shudo for most of his career, and then he ended up getting 1 fight in the LFA before heading over to Contender Series. He also has jiu-jitsu tattooed across his chest, so keep that in mind when you're betting on this man. But in his Dana White Contender Series fight, some of my quick notes on that, he got himself into some dangerous positions pretty quickly in that first round, but it was clear that his opponent, Elias, was just shooting for the submission, shooting for finishes the whole time, trying to make it flashy. And when you go for submission over position, it always tends to fail. So he got a little reckless with it, and that's when Estevam ended up taking over, where he started dominating him the rest of the way out in that first round, and his opponent gassed out, and he was able to take advantage of him with the ground and pound. Now, I don't see that happening at all in this fight because Charles Johnson, the name of his game is the cardio. He is the king of cardio at such a low weight class, which is awesome to see. So he's also not a one-trick pony like Estevam's first opponent, where Charles Johnson has a Muay Thai background. He's great at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, overall sound on the feet, and he's got some creative striking as well on the feet. So for me, the story here is he's been a very active fighter in 2023. He fought 3 fights in 4 months in the UFC, which is pretty remarkable. And then he took some time off, time off by his standard, like a normal fighter's time off from April until November now, giving him his 4th fight in 2023. First fight of his career in the UFC was Muhammad Mukayev. He still looks solid in that one, I thought. He's beaten Zumagulov as well as Jimmy Flick. My thoughts on both of them are known. Love my boy Zumagulov. May he find success in another promotion. And then Jimmy Flick, I think, is a bum. But he stepped in to fight Odi Osborne on short notice in February, right after that January win, lost by split decision. And then he fought Durden in April in a bout that he lost by decision. My notes on that Durden fight, Durden really jumped on his back from the get-go. And he just had him like a backpack the entire time. And Charles still persevered through where he maintained the cardio all 15 minutes, which is really good. And it's a good sign heading into this fight. It's just like he was waiting for these times to break free from Durden where he needed to actually get loose. He'd put some combos together, and then it felt like Durden would be right back on him again. Once you saw Durden start to gas in that third round a little bit, that was when Charles started to shine, where he was able to kind of do some stuff for 3 minutes in the third round. And then in the final 2 minutes, Durden went back on his bullshit, which, hey, not bullshit. It's a good strategy. And Durden is a good fighter. But I really love Charles' cardio, his experience, and the mixed bag of looks that he's going to be able to give this UFC newcomer here. I think Estevam, he also botched his weight cut when scheduled to fight Zumagulov in May. So he could see some similar struggles here at 125 pounds. It's a tough weight cut. And Charles has always been a professional when making weight. Size matchup is relatively the same, which doesn't really play into Charles' favor because he's typically a bigger guy for this weight class. That was a long-winded preview by me, but I think it's pretty clear here that I'm going with Charles. Rick, who do you have in this fight?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting fight because you've got a guy making his UFC debut, like we talked about, versus a former LFA champion he is well established as far as MMA goes on a global scale at this point. While he's got 5 UFC fights and is just 2 and 3, he's seen success against top-tier opponents across different promotions. So an interesting, huge step up in competition for Estevam against a reeling Charles Johnson that, in my opinion, has struggled against specialists throughout his UFC career and his tenure, and has gone to a lot of close decisions as a product of that. I mean, he's in his 5 UFC fights, he's gone to 4 decisions, 2 of which being split decisions. And since that debut fight against Muhammad Mokaev, where he lost, he's been a favorite every single fight since, despite all of those or a lot of those being on short notice, as you mentioned. So it's an interesting fight, given that he's not really dominant anywhere, but he's good everywhere and has that incredible cardio. He tends to get in those super tight exchanges and super tight fights to score because he can scramble off his back really well. He can wrestle pretty decently. He's a creative striker, as you mentioned. But especially this weight class, power, it just isn't really there as much anymore for huge knockouts. And Estevam could cause some different challenges. But really, I mean, his takedowns and where I see this fight finishing, if it does finish, is on the ground by submission. But I don't think that Estevam's going to have the success to be able to get it to the ground. I think that this fight likely goes to decision, but if it does get finished, I think it's because of a quick scramble by either fighter to be able to cinch up a submission that you just can't get out of, where you're just under the chin or whatever it may be, and you're done. You have to tap. That's a long-winded way of saying that I'm going to ever so slightly lean Johnson and pick Johnson in this fight, but I'm not taking either fighter. I'm staying away.
Fair enough. I feel super passionately about Johnson, and I think the reservations that you have are definitely fair. I just feel like the guys that he's lost to have been a tough draw for him, where he hasn't really lost any slouches, I would say, in this division. And coming up against Estevam here, I feel like he's got a pretty good matchup against a UFC, a guy on his UFC debut. So I found Charles Johnson money line at plus 115 on BetMGM and Caesars. It's pretty close to that on most books right now. I'll be locking that in for 1 unit. So go ahead and keep it locked in with us. And Rick, who will you be previewing next?
Next, we've got up Jonathan Pearce taking on Joanderson Brito in another fantastic affair on this prelim card. We'll see you there. All right, and depending on where you look, the 4th fight of the night or the 2nd fight of the night, depending on whether or not you're looking at UFC, Tapology, or others, we've got Jonathan Pearce taking on Joanderson Brito. And what is one of my favorite fights of the night. This stylistically should be a fantastic matchup and should not be on the prelims of this card in particular. This fight deserves to be on the main card of what is a 6-fight main card that is pretty bleh by UFC standards. And I'm excited for it, and we're going to hype it up. But by UFC standards, this should be on there. And the reason is, I mean, Jonathan Pearce is as good a top control wrestler as there is in the UFC. and at 14-4 and now 5-1 in the UFC. The stats really back that up. And Joanderson Brito in his own right is a powerful wrestler and a powerful striker. Now 15-3-1 in his UFC career, in his MMA career, 3-1 in the UFC. And what we should see in this fight is takedowns from both sides. Jonathan Pearce now is 4th all-time in significant strike accuracy, and 2nd in takedown accuracy within the featherweight division, and lands over 5.74 takedowns per 15 minutes. That significant strike accuracy comes from the fact that he is typically just landing hellacious ground and pound from the top, and that's where he's going to want to take this fight. His striking is continuing to improve. His boxing combinations are pretty rudimentary, but he does like to use the front kick up the middle to try and keep it at range. He actually did a decent bit of damage to Darren Elkins in his fight with him recently over that. And in that fight, though it went to decision, it probably should have stopped. If you go back and watch that fight and you like blood, that was about as bloody a face as you can imagine. And for those of you who are familiar with Darren Elkins, which if you watched MMA for a while, you are, it was a vintage Darren Elkins performance where he's just going to give 120% the entire fight. And he might get ragdolled, but damn it, he's going to keep going. So a fun fight to watch, but back on track. Jonathan Pearce is just going to want to do that for every fight. And he's been a huge favorite in the majority of his fights too, over -400. This, spoiler, is not the same. This is about a pick'em. Jonathan Pearce is up to -130, with Brito being +110, and for good reason. Spoiler, I've got Brito in this fight. I think that the power of Brito within the takedowns, his single and double legs, is going to be huge to be able to get Pearce down there. And the power and on the feet is going to be a difference maker. One of Jonathan Pearce's big holes in his game is that he goes forward and back in a straight line. He doesn't move that head off center much at all. And while he can try to pick that up, that's something that I think is just going to stick in his game for a while, no matter what changes he makes. And with the power that Brito has, and the amount that Pearce has been hit throughout his career, I think that he's going to be able to land a couple of those just powerful shots that'll wobble Pearce or force Pearce to go into a takedown that he doesn't want to take. And we've seen in Brito's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I mean, it is elite. For as much power as he has on the feet with 6 knockouts, he's got 7 submissions to his name. And so I think that this should be a fantastic fight. And if I've got anyone to get a finish in this fight, it's Brito. And that's why my official pick, and getting a little bit ahead of myself before I hand it over to you, Andy, to get your thoughts. But my pick is Brito inside the distance, but it pushes if it goes to the cards. So it's a no bet if the fight goes to the cards. And so if either fighter gets a finish, I've got Brito, and it's -115. So instead of getting him at plus money, I've got him to get the finish. I think he's got avenues on the feet and on the ground to be able to do it. And I think that we're in for one hell of a fight here. Andy, what do you got on this fight?
Yes, I don't have a bet on this fight. I do tend to lean your way, though, where I really like how explosive Brito is. I know that, like you said, he does struggle against the technical fighters, but just the stylistically, like how fun of a guy he is, that gives me a lot of excitement here, where just like to be bland, I really don't like the whole Jonathan Pearce thing. It doesn't get me as excited as it does with Brito. And to be honest with you, like that's where I draw the line. I know it's not as in-depth as the first analysis that I gave, but it's just the truth. Some of these like fights that I've seen of Jonathan Pearce, it's just whatever, where I feel like when you put him up against somebody who is as explosive as Brito, as fun of a fighter as Brito, someone who is going to be elite in the clinch like Brito, I really tend to lean with Brito, as well as just a fight fan. I want Brito to win. So again, I don't feel like I have as good of a knowledge base or am as in touch with this one as you are. So I'm going to stay away from the betting side, but as far as making a pick on the fight, I'm going to go Brito just like you.
Yeah, and if you want to get a little cute, I've seen it on different websites. But I think that if you're not really sure which way to go in this fight, Brito early, like round 1, round 2, could be an interesting play. And then if you want to go later, you can go Pearce, maybe round 3 or by decision, and get plus money on both sides. But either way, we're both going with Brito in this fight. I've got Brito inside the distance with a caveat that it's a push if it goes to the cards. That brings the odds down to -115, and I'm going to take that for a full unit. So we will see you on the next fight. We're covering Nikolas Motta versus Trey Ogden. We'll see you there. And next up on this UFC card, we've got Nikolas Motta facing Trey Ogden, with both fighters looking to get back up to 500 in their UFC careers. Both guys now 1-2 in the UFC. One guy in Motta has never seen it go to the cards, while Ogden has never not seen it go to the cards. All three of Ogden's fights have gone to the cards so far, and while Motta has finished his only win in Cameron Van Camp, no longer with the UFC, while getting knocked out by Jim Miller and Manuel Torres, whereas Trey Ogden lost to Jordan Leavitt later on the card by split decision, beat Daniel Zellhuber in the middle, who I'll talk to in a little bit, and then struggled really badly against Ignacio Bahamondes. And really the story for Ogden in this clash of styles is his BJJ. He's the trainer at his gym, and he's a submission specialist. While he can stand on the feet and his boxing is decent, it's not really dangerous. And that's really what that Ignacio Bahamondes fight highlighted, was the range in Bahamondes really kept Ogden at bay, and we didn't even really see Ogden try for takedowns in that fight. He stood at range, tried to disengage as much as he could, but every time he got in close, it was a speed disadvantage, which happens against Bahamondes, but also a damage disadvantage too. I mean, he looked like the slower fighter. He was struggling with the range, and that's not something that he's going to deal with as much in this Motta fight. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not that boxing improves. But what he does have to deal with is Motta's power. Motta does have power, and yes, he can get hit. He's not really going to get hit and dropped by Ogden. If you want your Hail Mary bet, it's probably Ogden by knockout. He's never gotten one in his career. I don't see it happening here. But I do see Motta having some trouble on the ground if it goes to the ground. Now, on the feet, Motta has 9 knockouts, 0 submissions. So there's a clear advantage for both fighters when it comes to on the feet versus on the ground. And this actually was scheduled for earlier this year, but it was delayed because of how bad the knockout was to Motta from Torres. So could Ogden crack him? Is that chin getting worse and worse? Maybe. We do know that Motta's defensively poor. He's hittable. And so we'll see if Ogden can be able to mix up the striking and the wrestling to be able to get it to the mat. Because once it goes to the mat, this fight's as good as over. But just a weird clash of styles here. Andy, I'd love to hear what you have on this fight or your takeaway on clashes of styles in general. But yeah, I think it's a really tight fight.
Yeah, I think that we, like last week with UFC 295, we do have a couple of these clash of styles on this card too. And this is one that gets me really excited because I do tend to lean Ogden here. I don't have a bet on this one, but I do really strongly feel that is the right pick to select him to win this fight. I just feel like with Motta, yeah, you're getting the power that he brings, right? But it does feel a bit one-dimensional. And yes, Ogden is not necessarily two-dimensional, three-dimensional, as versatile as some of the other guys on this card, which isn't saying a lot. But he is he is such stumbling over my words here. He is so good on the mat that I feel like it can make the difference. And when it comes to these BJJ guys taking on traditional strikers or guys who are literally just going to lean on their power, I'm always going to lean the BJJ guy. These guys know when to catch you when you're throwing a certain way, when to dive in or try to find a creative angle to jump into you when you move a certain way with striking. That's the name of the game with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I like Ogden here. The speed is a little bit of a, concern of mine, and that's probably why I'm not going to throw money on it for my own card. I might do like a personal play, but for my own card, for the purpose of the podcast, I'm not going to do anything with this one. Again, it's more so a skill set thing for me, and the clash of styles, I'm always going to tend to take the BJJ guy unless somebody's striking is world class, and don't think Motta's striking is world class, I have to say.
No, I don't really either. It's the volume of Motta that scares me too, and his propensity to throw a lot of kicks. He's got good kicks, but in a fight against a guy like Ogden, who can catch one, flip you, get you taken down real quick, that's where the issue could come. And he's got decent takedown defense, but I just think that for him to get going offensively, he's going to have to put himself out there a little bit and get taken down or be at risk of getting taken down. And I think that low volume as well as that likely apprehension to throw those kicks will result in either a more boring affair that's a lot closer on the feet than it really should be, or you end up getting Ogden on the mat. So I've got a half unit on Ogden. He's slight plus money. This is close odds as well at plus 108. But I've also got the under 2.5. I think that one of these guys is going to be able to have their way and then run to a decision or run to a finish. And so I've got under 2.5 at minus 135. I've got that for a full unit, and then Ogden at plus 108 for a half unit. So I'm going with Ogden. Andy's going with Ogden. Next up, we've got Uros Medic versus, blanking on it, Jonny Parsons.
Jonny Parsons.
And we will see you on the main card next.
Hey guys, just want to give everyone a disclaimer here. As we were recording the podcast tonight, the news came out that Medic's fight against Jonny Parsons has been canceled, but he is still fighting. So he will be fighting against actually, Rick, I'll let you pronounce it because I botched it when I tried to say it earlier. He's going up against Myktybek or Orolbai.
Yeah, that's about as good as I can pronounce it.
The reason we don't have a solid pronunciation on his name, it is his UFC debut. He is coming in from a couple fights with LFA, and will be stepping in on here 4 days short notice to take on Medic. So no odds yet are out on this, obviously. They will be out here in the coming days. So make sure to follow us on Twitter at AndyHH Sports, at RickHH Sports. We'll be able to tweet out some plays for this fight if there's anything that's worth betting on. And we wanted to go ahead and still include our analysis because the stuff that we talk about with Medic still stands true for his fight that's coming up in the next couple of days. So appreciate you guys listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. And sorry about having to include this disclaimer. Coming up next, we've got Uros Medic taking on Jonny Parsons. Medic is coming into this one with 7 KOs, 2 subs, no wins by decision. He's 3-1 in the UFC after entering the promotion via a Contender Series victory in 2020. And he will be taking on Jonny Parsons, who is 9-3, 1-0 in the UFC with 7 knockouts and 2 decisions to his professional win column. Medic has finished all of his fights. So as I touched on, that's been great for him, right? But the other side of that is he's also been finished as he lost to a round 1 rear naked choke to Jalen Turner in 2021 as his only loss, but an impressive loss. So none of his fights have ever seen him go to decision so far. He's 6'1", weighing in at welterweight at 170, taking on a Jonny Parsons guy who is a little interesting in my opinion. Parsons has talked about how much weight he cuts to make it to welterweight. He talks about how he cuts, like he's in the process of his weight cut. He's cutting like 30 some pounds. He doesn't seem like that big of a dude to be cutting this much weight to get to welterweight, but so be it. He is going to be an interesting test for Medic, but I do feel that with Medic's experience and the resume that he's been able to compile thus far in his 4 fights in the UFC, paired with the Contender Series bout, I do give him the slight edge over Jonny Parsons. But from a more technical standpoint, I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Like Medic, as you mentioned, now at welterweight, and it's good that you mentioned the Parsons weight and how much he's trying to cut, because Medic is sort of the opposite. Like he used to somehow be at 155 and has moved up to 170, had a long layoff, had a bad hand, and came into that the Jedi matchup against Matthew Semmelsberger in 170, thinking that he might be a bit of the smaller fighter and that power might be a bit of an issue. And he proved in no time that he belonged in the weight class. So he's now solidly up to 170. He's been training and preparing there for now a long time. And he saw a lot of success in the Semmelsberger fight on the feet with some of that different movement that he has with his feet, odd timing, and really that left straight. He can throw that left hand in a straight, over the top, hook, uppercut, however he wants to. But he can also throw that right in combination with it. And the way that he finishes combinations is deadly. And that's sort of how he was able to finish Semmelsberger in that 3rd round. Was he flurried in, landed a few punches up top, landed a knee up the middle to the jaw, finished it with a couple on the way out to wobble him, and then chased him down, hit him with a spinning back fist that put him down before finishing him. And you could argue it might have been a little bit early as far as stoppages go. Not the worst stoppage I've seen, not the best, but regardless, was able to drop him in a close fight in the 3rd round that likely would have given him the decision anyways. So, and Parsons is interesting because in theory, you would think that he's the better fighter, right? If you were just listening to us right now, you would think that he's the bigger fighter. Well, he's going to have a 4-inch height disadvantage and a 2-inch reach disadvantage, if I could speak.
He's just thick.
And so, yeah, like he's a bit of a thick boy. and he sort of operates like he's the thick boy, right? Like when you think like the big bully at school, like you think like, hey, he can take a punch, like he'll keep his hands high towards his face, and he guards the body decently well. But a lot of times he likes to just stand there with it and be stationary and get hit. And with a guy like Medic, who's got power, similar to Slava Claus from last week, with a guy who's got that much power, he's going to be able to find his way around the guard to hit you behind the ears, to rip you to the body as soon as you start getting a little too high. And that speed of Medic is really a difference maker. One of the other flags that I see here personally for Parsons is his propensity to get into brawls. I like guys who want to be able to take one or who can prove that they can take one, but not after a while. Like, you don't want to keep getting hit. And he's had some different concussion issues. He also had a huge weight cut, as you mentioned, and he will for this fight as well, in theory. But I don't like the amount that he likes to get hit against a guy like Medic. And I think that that's probably represented here in the line, with Medic being a sizable favorite compared to the others that we've covered so far at -235. Parsons coming in at +200. And we're looking to see a knockout more than likely because the total's at 1.5. Juice slightly to the over at -145. I think that if Parsons can't find some success early with the leg kicks, he could get in trouble. And Medic will be able to impose his will moving forward if it's just a boxing match. So I've got Medic in this fight pretty confidently. I've got him parlayed with somebody down the line in this card, straight up. And so I'll get to that in that card. But picking Medic officially for me. Andy, what are your final thoughts here?
I'm also picking Medic. I feel like he's going to have a huge advantage with the size. He's awesome with the body shots where, hey, those hurt even more on a thick boy, more than you would think at least, as well as like the timing that he's going to be able to have. He is just so well-rounded as a striker, in my opinion, that it's going to be a little bit too much for Jonny Parsons. So I took a same route, yet a different route, where I'm taking Medic money line at -225 on BetMGM and parlaying it with the Houston Texans money line -210. And that gives you at +113, which I'll be doing for a unit. My reasoning behind the Houston Texans play, you can find at happyhoursports.net. Every week I have an early best bets article that comes out Sunday night, Monday morning. And I have a pretty long, extensive reason why I like the Texans spread this weekend. So keep it locked in with us as we move on to the next fight, which is Amanda Ribas taking on Luana Pinheiro.
Coming up with the next fight on our main card, we have Amanda Ribas coming in and fighting the undefeated in the UFC, Luana Pinheiro. 3-0 in the UFC, Pinheiro is coming back and fighting Michelle Waterson-Gomez earlier this year, winning by split decision after almost a 2-year hiatus, 15 or 16 months. So not too close to 2 years, I guess. But either way, quite the layoff, though, for her. She's had some different injuries and fight cancellations throughout her career. Was scheduled to face Jessica Penne twice, and both fights ended up getting canceled, and a quick replacement being on the way for her. But Pinheiro, judo background, BJJ purple belt at minimum now, could be even higher now. But you're going to see that judo background on display. It is head throws, and it is violent head throws when she's able to land them. And that's where, if she's going to have success, it'll be in that, because at range, she's got some good power and some good vigor, but she likes to stay super wide and she likes to dance around the outside. She likes to throw feints, but not really efficient feints where you're getting somebody to jump or to react to a certain movement, whether it be a takedown or a strike. It's more just like raw feints at range that you never think you're going to land in the first place. So interesting to see if she tries to make those a little bit more dangerous moving forward. But I saw that throughout her 3 UFC fights. It was a little bit of a red flag. And now she's going to fight Amanda Ribas, who 6-3 in the UFC. Her big detriment is that 3 of her 4 losses in her career are by knockout. She's gotten cracked multiple times before. And she lost by ground and pound to Macy Barber last time out, which is not a good look for anybody. She's also gotten finished by Marina Rodriguez, which can happen as well. And her other UFC loss was to Caitlin Chukagian, which is the ha-ha queen. So it happens to the best of them. You can lose by decision to Chukagian. A lot do. And it's not even a black eye on your record at this point. It's just a formality. You never really gain any stock going up against Chukagian unless you're one of the best. So, but yeah, so back to where we want to be. Ribas is, despite her chin, about as well-rounded A fighter sort of like Charles Johnson in the sense that she's good everywhere, but not elite anywhere. And so she can struggle against some of those specialists. It'll be interesting. Before the Viviane Araujo fight, if I can pronounce her name right, I was pretty high on her to win that fight, despite the power that Araujo had, because she does a decent job of being able to circle, keep her distance, keep herself safe. And so I like her in the same sense in this fight. As long as she can stay away from some of those head throws, those judo throws, and get to the ground, where Pinheiro loves to throw her disgusting ground and pound, I think that she could dance her way to a decision win in this fight, and I think the odds sort of reflect that. But Andy, would love to get your thoughts on this fight with Pinheiro coming back to the UFC and trying to stake her claim and make a run towards the top.
Yeah, so this is where the start of my run of dogs is going to take place. I like her power to the takedown. I also feel like she is a great textbook judo fighter that you touched on. She hasn't looked as great striking as people would have liked, where, I mean, that was her MO. That was her thing heading into the UFC, was like how good her striking is. And then in her three fights in the UFC, it just hasn't like looked as amazing as you would want it to. But I mean, she has beat the cardio queen, Sam Hughes, a win against Michelle Waterson-Gomez. I always think that's like a fine looking win on the resume. And then you look at Ribas, and for me, I'm a little concerned for her because she's making the move down to straw weight for this one. And she now has what I would consider to be kind of a suspect chin. You look at her, I mean, she had a great run to start her UFC career, but is now 2-3 her last 5 in, with a loss to Macy Barber and ground and pound, which Macy Barber, stud. Chuk, like you talked about, and then another loss by punches to Marina Rodriguez. There's just so many instances here where she hasn't done so hot against strikers. And I feel like in an odds matchup against two girls who had that judo base, judo was where they started and they expanded their games to MMA, I really like Luana here at plus 210 as the hot young prospect at plus 210 for half a unit on DraftKings. So that's the way I'm going to be going. There's a lot of these on this card where I looked at the odds and I was like, it's really here. This is really how it is. Like, I don't know if it's just the book put these lines up too early and everyone just started slamming the favorites because they didn't know what to do, or if it's truly I missed the message on a lot of these and it's going to be a big favorites night. But I do really feel strongly about the dogs this week, and Luana gets us kicked off because this is just one of those. I feel like the odds should be a little bit closer for the current form of Ribas and for how we have not seen Luana's form necessarily reflect all of her skill set that she came into the UFC with. What do you have?
Gotcha. I'm going the other way. I've got Ribas here. I think this is a big step up for Luana Pinheiro, who, to your point, like I'll take the other side of that point where you said, hey, like it hasn't all come together yet in the UFC. You expect it to, especially with that long layoff. I think this is a big step up and a lot for her to have to figure out in a one-fight change. I don't think by any means that her career is going to be short, but I think that Ribas is able to work on the outside, keep herself safe, and win this fight. And so I've got her as the other leg to that Medic parlay from last fight. And so combining those two is plus 103. I'll rip a full unit on that. But to keep myself safe a little bit, I think that if she does lose, it's going to be by knockout again. I think that she should be able to outpoint her. And so I'm going to take Pinheiro also by knockout or TKO at plus 450 and put a quarter unit on that to sort of save myself sort of at somewhat of a hedge against my bet. But so should end up netting 0.75 units there. If not, almost a wash. So happy with that. Again, to summarize, I've got Ribas and Medic combined for plus 103 for a full unit, but taking Pinheiro by knockout or TKO at plus 450 for a quarter unit. Andy, you've got Pinheiro at what odds?
Plus 210 on the money line on DraftKings, and I'm doing that for a half unit. So Rick and I, opposite sides here. We will be heading into the next card, which is a lot more lopsided than this one. It is Payton Talbott taking on Nick Aguirre. Stay locked in with us, and we will see you on the other side.
All right, with the third fight on the main card, we've got UFC debutant Payton Talbott facing Nick Aguirre.
Aguirre.
I know I mispronounced that. Aguirre. In his second UFC fight, after losing on debut to Dan Argueta, who close fight in that fight, but should be an interesting one in this affair. But I'll go ahead and jump to the odds. Talbot, a minus 900 favorite, open minus 550. People have just continued to jump on the fighter who is now 6-0, coming off a Dana White's Contender Series. Dana White's Contender Series win, but the 25-year-old has a lot to learn. While he is a world-class striker, and he is that rare combination of power plus volume that really just strikes fear into all opponents, he does not have any takedown defense at all, and has had to overcome adversity in multiple fights because he's just been taken down and held down for a lot of the rounds. So while he is unbelievably dangerous and will be against Nick in this fight, that caveat just always lingers in the back of my head for a minus 900 favorite. That makes me question it a little bit. And what's interesting to me is that not only is Nick a southpaw, which could make it could add a little bit more time for Talbot to be able to ingest and download the different differences between stances. But it's the great takedowns. I mean, Aguirre is a BJJ blue belt, and he's often in competitions. Like, he is just continually competing. He's a wrestler by trade in high school and college. And so while he's got a poor level of competition throughout his UFC career, I really think that he's going to be able and will just go straight for takedowns in this fight. He knows that if he stands, he's probably going to get his head knocked off. And so he should pretty quickly go right to the takedowns. Whether he can keep him there, whether he can notch his first takedown or two is going to be the difference in this fight. If he can't get that takedown, this fight's as good as over. And that's why the odds are where they are. But I don't know if they should be that steep. And Andy, I'd love to hear what you've got on this fight because it's a weird one.
Yeah, Talbot has come in with all of this hype from the MMA community, and he came into that Contender Series fight. And to me, like, I remember watching that one. Everyone was like, you have to see Payton Talbot. I hadn't seen him before. And it just was underwhelming to me. Like, he was just like, he was trying stupid shit. Like, the sense of urgency wasn't really there for Contender Series, in my opinion. And he got his first decision win as a result. And it was week one of Dana White Contender Series. So I was expecting Dana White to walk out and be like Joe Pyfer 2.0. But he didn't. He was like, no, it's Payton Talbot. I have to sign him after Dana allegedly doesn't know anything about the guys that come into Contender Series. Okay. So people love comparing this guy to Sean O'Malley as well. And it shows. He doesn't check the leg kicks, and he sometimes leaves his head open and exposed. So the striking, I mean, it's his bread and butter. So that also is the Sean O'Malley comp. I'm giving him a hard time here. I said it in our preview earlier. I'm going to say it again. This is another fight where I'm going to tend to lean on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy against the striker. I feel like Nick Aguirre's game, he's got that blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He does a ton of BJJ tournaments, which you can see all over his socials. And that's going to translate really well for him in MMA. It always has, and it's going to continue to do that way. I totally agree. Like, the level of competition is very different, but has Payton Talbot gone up against somebody who is such a specialist at BJJ where he's going to struggle potentially? That's how I see it. Aguirre is moving down to bantamweight for this bout. He's been fighting at featherweight before that. It's just, everything is so good where I feel like if he can get Talbot down, he should be able to go to work, get his. And I love the edge that he has over Talbot because it's not reflected whatsoever in the betting odds. I mean, you said it, like, I'm seeing minus 800, like you're seeing minus 900 on Talbot. Talbot should not be this big of a favorite. I get that he is a very hyped up prospect. I understand. And like, there's plenty of great reasons why. But when you're on your UFC debut and you're going up against somebody who also was a highly touted prospect before taking that Argueta fight on short notice, lost, which I'm not going to blame him for. Argueta's great on the mat as well. Like, I think I took Aguirre in that fight. That fight was in January. I'm pretty sure I took Aguirre. So I'm going to do it again. I'm going to take Nick Aguirre on the money line at plus 575 on DraftKings. Let me make sure that's still, yeah, plus 575 on DraftKings for a quarter of a unit. And I think you took it a step further, Rick. What do you have?
I've got Aguirre by decision at plus 1,200 for a quarter unit myself. I think that if he ends up getting on top and holding him there, I think that we could see another fight that goes to decision, sort of like how Payton Talbot's Dana White's Contender Series fight win against Reyes Cortez. So I think over the past year, he's been training with more and more world-class strikers. So I think Yair Rodriguez is in his camp. Ignacio Bahamondes, who we mentioned earlier, long, rangy strikers, similar to Talbott. And so he's had time with these guys to try and level up his skills, and he's had a year between fights to really make those improvements. So I'm eager to see whether or not he levels up in the striking, because he keeps saying that he's getting better and has confidence in it. I pray that he does not have too much confidence in it, because he will get knocked out. But if he's able just to quickly be able to feint, get to the ground, get into the ground, I think that we could see some improvements there. And I think we could, over the course of 3 rounds, see him get a decision. So I've got Aguirre by decision at plus 1,200 for a quarter unit, and he's got him straight up plus 600. Is that right?
I got him at plus 575 on DraftKings, also for a quarter unit. And just real quick on Talbott, like one last thing. When you're struggling against a guy who's getting his second opportunity on Dana White Contender Series, his sister is Tracy Cortez, who is a great female mixed martial artist, like that just tells me you're not necessarily ready. So if he's made a lot of market improvements to his takedown defense and all that, go ahead. Like, more power to you, Talbott, but the odds should not be skewed this way. So I'm glad that we're taking a stand against the odds here, grabbing the value. Coming up next, we've got my favorite fight of the night, Jordan Leavitt taking on Chase Hooper. You will not want to miss our analysis on this one. Stay tuned. Coming up next, we have Chase the Dream Hooper taking on Jordan the Monkey King Leavitt. Jordan Leavitt is 11-2 in his mixed martial arts career, and is 4-2 in the UFC, while Chase Hooper has a similar UFC record at 4-3, but is 12-3-1, even though he is a few years, only 4 years younger than Jordan Leavitt. So, Rick, as soon as this fight came out, we were sending this fight to each other and talking about it as we found out that it was happening. I still can't believe we're getting this matchup. I feel like Chase the Dream Hooper is going to be an interesting one with Jordan Leavitt's style. And it really is, like, it's not the clash of styles. It's the clash of the same styles going up against each other, where you're not going to see a ton of strengths with these guys on the feet, although it is clear that Chase is starting to improve his game with striking. That's been seen as he moved up to lightweight. He was previously a 6'1" featherweight, and now he's a 6'1" lightweight at 155 pounds. That move for him happened this year. The other thing, too, is he's started to train with Upstate Karate. So that's Stephen Thompson and his dad. World class. I mean, world class when it comes to striking. So he's learning from some of the best, and I'm glad that he did that for his game, because he was so one-dimensional that anybody who could match what he was doing on the ground was going to obliterate him on the feet. And we saw him actually throw some strikes in his last fight and piece together some combos, which was impressive. Impressive by his standards, I'll say. Another funny anecdote for me is that Jordan Leavitt won his last fight by flying knee. So I guess anything is possible with striking for these guys, right? This is going to be an all-out brawl on who can be the most creative on the mat, I think. And I just feel like because of the Paddy Pimblett effect that Jordan Leavitt is facing, the boring nature of this fight for the casual fight fan, and then paired with all the hype that's surrounded Chase Hooper ever since he came into the MMA community, ever since he came into the UFC, I just feel like the Monkey King is being a little undervalued in this spot. Rick, do you feel the same way about that with Leavitt?
I do and I don't. I think that Chase Hooper should be the favorite. Whether it should be a 2-1 favorite, I'm not really sure. But I do want to announce the latest UFC addition to the roster, Draymond Green. While you were talking, there was a video footage of him getting ejected tonight, putting Rudy Gobert into a rear naked choke while on the court. So I want to officially invite him to the UFC roster as a heavyweight, because there's no way he's making weight at 205. Anyways, to stop from derailing the show, I do think that Hooper should be the favorite, and I think that his size is going to play a big factor here. As you mentioned, he went up to 155, and is continuing to grow into that gigantic frame. Now, the striking of Leavitt is going to be better than Hooper's, I think, which is a weird statement to make. He has a little bit of power behind it, and Hooper doesn't move his head at all. He's got virtually no striking defense. So while it is improving, his striking is, until it shows noticeable steps of improvement, I don't favor him on the feet against really anybody. His hands go low. He doesn't move the head. He could just get pieced up. And Jordan Leavitt, I mean, as you said, he has 2 knockouts in his career. One is a slam in 2019, and his infamous slam on the head of a guy 22 seconds in, which epic as all hell. I mean, go look it up.
If you haven't seen that, it's on the UFC socials right now.
Look up his
so
slam.
go check.
It's scary a little bit because he drops him on his head, but impressive nonetheless. And the other one was that knee. So And Leavitt after the fight was like laughing. He was like, dude, my team never would have thought I would have ever gotten a knockout. I didn't even think I could. So like my point being is that Leavitt is not by any means going to knock him out on the feet. But on the ground, it'll be interesting because Leavitt has always been position over submission. And I know you talked about that early in the card and a little bit now. While he can land a lot of those submissions, he's not going to give up or put himself at risk throughout the time. And we saw that in the Patty fight as well. And I really think that while Hooper is long, while he might be able to cinch up maybe a triangle or an arm bar with those long legs, I think that Leavitt could be safer here. Try to keep the fight on the feet, damage him on the feet. And if it goes to the ground, well, you're probably safe in top control. And I think that he's a smart fighter like that. He's a very cerebral fighter. And so I've got this. I do lean Leavitt. I don't know if it should be. I don't know how tight the odds should be, but I lean Leavitt at where the odds are currently. And I'll pick Leavitt to win the fight. But really, my bet comes down to fight not going the distance. I think that both of these fighters are continuing to make big leaps in their game and looking to make a statement. And I think that one of these guys is going to be able to, in the transitions, in the scrambles on the mat, be able to find a submission and finish the fight. Or if it stays on the feet, either Chase Hooper just continues to get jabbed to death to where he's bleeding everywhere and falls down or whatever. But I think the fight doesn't go to the cards, and that's minus 110 for 1 unit. And my pick is Leavitt. But, Andy?
Yes. So I'm going Leavitt on the money line. I'm going Leavitt on the money line for a full unit, which I got on BetMGM at plus 185. I just think that where Hooper is skilled, Leavitt is equally as talented. And with more creative ways of finishing people on Leavitt's resume, I love that threat for him. I think that he offers up against Chase, where this feels like yet another gatekeeper fight for Hooper. It's like you have to get past this level in order to actually get some more elite names to be added to your resume, because this is a fight where you've got two guys, for how low they are in the lightweight rankings. A lot of MMA fans know who both these dudes are. And this is just one of them. For as soon as these guys win this fight, you'll start to see them get some more notable names. And I think that Chase has improved his game, but he's not yet there, which is unfortunate to say. I mean, he was drawn a tough hand where he's cursed, right? He's got 4-3 record in the UFC. He was the UFC's youngest fighter at a certain point. He will get there someday, I hope. I'm a big Chase Hooper guy. I'm a big Chase Hooper fan, but not today. The odds are way too good on Leavitt. Give me Leavitt on the money line plus 185 for 1 unit. Rick has the fight not to go to the distance at minus 110 for a unit, and he's also picking Leavitt in this fight. We have 2 more fights in this card. We will next be previewing Jake Matthews taking on Michael Morales. Stay tuned.
All right, with our co-main event of the evening, we have Jake Matthews at 12-6 in the UFC, 19-6 across his MMA career, taking on the undefeated Michael Morales, 15-0, 3-0 in the UFC, with a couple good wins early in his UFC career to date. So should be a massively entertaining affair with the Ecuadorian Morales looking to really break that next glass ceiling in Matthews. And Matthews is sort of that. He's sort of the gatekeeper to gatekeepers at this point. And with a questionable chin where he was dropped by Semmelsberger, who we mentioned actually earlier on this card, and talking about Uros Medic, who will actually have an update for in a little bit as well. Or I guess when you're hearing this earlier in the card. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. But Matthews, the gatekeeper to gatekeepers, can have a bit of a questionable chin. He was dropped by Semmelsberger multiple times, as I mentioned, and was knocked and actually has been knocked out a couple times throughout his UFC career. And that'll happen when you're 12-6. 12-6 in the UFC, was 7-0 coming into the UFC. And I mean, it has been a long UFC career for Jake Matthews. I mean, back in 2016, in the height of Kevin Lee, he was knocked out in the first round by him. He was choked out by James Vick back in 2015 in the UFC. And more recently, he was finished by Sean Brady, which happens. Sean Brady's an excellent fighter. We saw him lose recently, but an incredible fighter. And then beat Andre Fialho, who he was sort of discounted against. It was a pick'em fight because everyone knew Jake Matthews and the quality that he had on the mat and on the feet. But a lot of people were going with Andre Fialho, and me included, because of the power that he possesses and the questionable chin of Jake Matthews. And what Jake Matthews did there was put on the performance of a lifetime and dominated Andre Fialho and eventually finishing him in the second round with the right cross. But I recommend you go back and watch that fight if you have any questions or are interested in Jake Matthews and you haven't seen him before, because it was as impressive as possible. And a really big moment in his career is when he switched up from lightweight up to welterweight, moving up from 155 to 170. He was 5-3 when he was fighting over at 150, 155. And is 8-3 since. And while he's lost 2 of his last 4, well, 2 of those come against Sean Brady and Matthew Semelsberger, who you really can't fault all that much. Semelsberger really hasn't been able to solidify himself among the elite or next to the elite, but still a very respectable fighter. And to lose to him by decision is respectable. But Morales, much more green to the UFC, incredible knockout power. But what goes by the wayside because of his 11 knockouts and 1 submission is his wrestling. And ironically, that might be the best path to victory for him, is just to be able to wrestle, keep top control, and be able to do it, because on the feet, we know the powers that Matthews also has, and he's be able to knock out and finish other guys in the UFC. So, Andy, interested to hear where you have on this fight or what side you lean, but should be an interesting one.
Yeah, so I've gone back and forth on this one because I agree with you. I think that if Morales brings in his wrestling, he might win. The thing with Morales is, though, like, he has that as his base, and he's so good at it. He's only got 1 submission win to his name. Most of his wins have come by knockout, which he's got 11 wins in. So I think that's his issue here, is he might think that he's better on the feet at striking than he actually is. He has so many knockouts, and he's got a lot of guys that he trains with that are encouraging him to fight in this style, even though we know that wrestling base that he has is so strong. For me, Morales does not have great striking defense. He does have some long-range striking, which could give Matthews some trouble. But for me, I think Matthews is so experienced on the feet, and we saw Morales not look amazing against Max Griffin, that I think that there's some solid value here on Jake Matthews. And it goes into what I was saying. The dogs are barking on this card, man. And I know Matthews is a vet, and I'm a fan of Morales. I think that Morales has hopefully a long career at welterweight ahead of him, where I really think he's a stud. And we have some young studs starting to enter the welterweight division in potentially the rankings, and I consider him to be one of them. But I just have some serious concerns about that striking defense going up against a vet like Jake Matthews.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that I'm right there with you. I think it's a close fight, and I've gone a little bit back and forth myself, actually. And I know to the listeners, y'all are probably like, "Oh, we all talked beforehand," and well, we didn't. Like Morales, if you haven't looked at the odds as a viewer or listener, Morales is up to -300, and I just don't see him as a 3-1 favorite in this fight. And yes, I get he's got the power. Yes, Jake Matthews has been finished before, but Jake Matthews is getting finished by some of the top guys. And I just think that it's much closer to a 2-1, maybe even closer to a pick'em than it is a 3-1 favorite. So I've got Matthews. I've got Matthews to win the fight overall, but I've got him as a bet too, and I've got him at +250, and I'm just throwing a half unit on it just because I think the odds are way farther apart than they should be. So, Andy, what about you?
I'm going with a similar approach, man. I really. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, when we started recording, I thought I was going to go with Morales, maybe throw him in a parlay. I can't do it. Like, I have serious concerns about his striking defense, and I can see him picking up his first loss against a vet. I think that this type of loss, though, against someone like Jake Matthews, could really help Morales be like wake the fuck up and like actually work, like continue to grow that wrestling game that you've been so good at. Work on that striking defense. Then, like, when you get a loss like that, that's more constructive. Then he can maybe find the right people around him to really grow his game in a much more constructive way instead of trying the same shit, which didn't look as good in the last fight. So I'm also going with Matthews, the exact same approach as you. Go ahead. I know you want to say something real quick.
Yeah, one more point before we switch into that last fight, too, that I really do want to make is that in Morales' few fights in the UFC, his striking defense hasn't been great. He really is trying to either engage on his terms or be all the way out. So he's either in or he's out. And so in a fight with Matthews, I mean, he's gotten popped in other fights. Matthews has good power. I think that we could end up maybe seeing Morales finished as well. So it'll be interesting. Both of us going with the underdog, and Matthews has a sizable underdog. I've got a half unit on it. Andy, do you have a half unit on it as well?
Half unit as well. Yep. Hey, what you got? At +250?
Yep, I got it at +250 unless you can give me better.
Nope, +250.
+250 it is. Both of us going with Matthews at +250 for a half unit. On to the main event of the night, Brendan Allen versus the Bear Jew, Paul Craig. We'll see you there.
And last but certainly not least, we have Brendan Allen taking on Paul Craig in the main event at 185 pounds. Allen comes in with 5 knockouts, 13 subs, and 4 decisions to his name. Paul Craig, meanwhile, 4 knockouts, 13 subs, no decision victories. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, but I do not believe that Paul Craig has seen a decision loss he has 1 decision loss in his career. So, Brendan Allen, this is his second main event, and in the first one, he beat Andre Muniz in the 3rd round. It's worth noting that Paul Craig's first middleweight fight, and also his most recent fight, was also against Andre Muniz, beaten by ground and pound in round 2. Allen's 2 losses in the UFC were to Sean Strickland and Chris Curtis. So he lost to the Extreme Couture brothers. I forget what I think they have a podcast. Yeah, it's called The Man Dance. So pretty funny that he loses to the 2 podcast hosts as we preview that in our MMA pod now. Allen has the clear striking advantage over Craig. It's night and day. Most people have a striking advantage over Craig. I would be surprised if there was that many in the middleweight division that didn't have a striking advantage over Craig. He loves the leg kicks and loves the kicks to the body, but that's where I see there potentially being an avenue for Craig to be able to latch onto a couple of them, or Allen overexposes himself in one of the and gets a little too cozy, and then Craig's able to pounce. I don't know if he necessarily can knock out Paul Craig, but I do know that he's going to be able to put some serious damage on him throughout the fight. The thing with Paul Craig, though, and you know this as well as I do, Rick, he's not going to go down. He's not going to go out. Like, he's going to look like dead, battered. He's going to look like a zombie, but he's still a massive submission threat to anyone he is fighting. Paul Craig, this is his first 5-round fight in his entire MMA career. So he's been a champion in other promotions, but championship fights in those promotions were only 3 rounds. It's his second fight at 185 pounds. So he made the move down after kind of being a little wishy-washy in light heavyweight, but being light heavyweight for a long time. He's a master of his craft when it comes to the submission game, and that's the thing. This is why this is such an interesting fight. Any fight with Paul Craig is going to come down quite literally to the final seconds, because if you slip up once and give him any type of window, he will pounce. Where he is not, I would even give Allen the advantage, like, from a wrestling standpoint. Like, he's going to be able to wrestle and stuff, but just one lapse in your concentration and Paul Craig will be able to get you. And that's where I see Craig, like, having the value here. Allen has just, like, started to just run away with these odds. And I get it. Like, he should, like, very rightfully so favored it. But, like, he opened at minus 270 on DraftKings. Brendan Allen, that is. He's now down to minus 400. Like, he's minus 450 in some spots. That's just not right for somebody who is such a threat like Paul Craig, in my opinion, where I feel like you're getting a lot of good value here. I'd be interested to see if you feel the same way or if you're going to kind of zag with my analysis there, Rick.
Yeah, I think that Paul Craig has a lot of – he's got his ways that he can win a fight, and because of that, he will always be in every fight before he starts, in the sense that at any point he can get rocked, or the fight could go to the ground. He could pull guard, whatever it is, and then you're in a world of danger. But his opponent in Brendan Allen is a guy that offensively is great. I'm worried a little bit about him wanting to take the fight to the mat. And hopefully, like, I'm hoping in his fight IQ that he's not trying to say, you know what, let me prove myself as the more dominant grappler and submission artist, and takes the fight where he should, which is on the feet. Because as you mentioned, and you've covered most of it, and there's really not too much to add there, but he is the much more adept striker. He should be the quicker one. I worry a little bit about Craig's chin, which has been tested at light heavyweight. Granted, this is middleweight, but we'll see how the weight cut affects him in a sense. But if this fight is on the feet, Allen wins 99 times out of 100 for me. And if it goes to the ground, I think that Allen still has a decent shot, but I think that it's probably Craig's advantage there on the ground. I think pretty irrefutably. But what I've got in this fight is under 1.5 at minus 115. I think that Brendan Allen's going to be slick around the outside, similar to how in the main event or the co-main event last week, Tom Aspinall was against Sergey Pavlovich, where he was just the quicker guy on the outside, could keep the range if he wanted to, and then just picked him apart. And it might not be as straightforward as that fight was at heavyweight, but I see sort of the same thing happening in Craig having to go at long ranges to get the fight to the ground or to pull guard. And if Allen is I'm sure that his camp has just been telling him, keep it on the feet, and that wrestling is good enough to keep it there. So if he decides to take it to the mat, it'll be a lot closer fight than it is. But I think that's where that's why the odds are where they are, which is so split. But yeah, so I've got the under. I've got Allen to win, but I don't. Minus 450 is never something you should take straight up, and we know that.
Or parlay for that matter.
In particular, there's so much that could go wrong for a minus 450 favorite that makes me apprehensive to take it. Yeah.
You shouldn't be parlaying those odds either, to be honest. Like when you get that high, it's not adding a ton of value to a parlay. I am picking Allen to win the fight. I am a Paul Craig fan. I will give that stipulation. I am going to put the money on him, though, to win because I think it's such good value. I really do. Like there is a world where Paul Craig gets the finish here, and it's going to be insane. It'll be like all over the headlines and stuff because Brendan Allen would be a massive win. There's also a world where Paul Craig loses and then retires or fights one more time and retires because that was a rumor for a bit 2 fights ago that he was going to potentially retire after another loss. So I am going to go Paul Craig for the value here. And the best I can find right now is plus 350 on Caesars as well as Bet Online. So I'll be going with Paul Craig at plus 350 for half a unit on the main event. That is my 5th dog in a row on the main card. I start off with a favorite in the parlay and then end with five dogs in a row. So I'm honestly, I mean, I know that it's 5 underdogs. It's not the most exciting thing, but I really do feel sincerely that there is a lot of value on the underdogs this week. And last but not least, I want to go ahead and bring in our producer, Ben, as he would like a few words as well on this fight after people loved his analysis last week too. So Ben, come on in. What do you think about this Brendan Allen and Paul Craig bout?
Welcome. Appreciate that. First of all, I have to admit, and by the way, I wish I could be on video tonight. I did not set up to be on the pod tonight, so I apologize. I don't have a backdrop or anything, but
caught him by
I
surprise.
do want to admit I got owned. I got owned on the 295 card, right? Like I was very transparently a Yuri Prohaska super fan there. I let my emotion of being a fan kind of get in the way. Pereira is clearly a very good fighter, and he looks to have a really nice next, say, 18 months in that division, just being dominant. However, I will say this is a little bit unfair too, but I think there's some real value here on this fight that we're talking about tonight for the UFC Fight Night. I think Paul Craig's got ridiculous value here. Now, that said, I can't dispute either side of what you guys have said. I think Paul Craig makes mistakes in fights more often than Brendan Allen does. And I think if he's got a good camp coming into this fight, which that's debatable. I don't know where he's at on that. I don't know how hard he trains, in and out of each fight. I think that if he's got anybody with any brain cells, they already know to drill into his head, stop only looking for the submission, right? Be aware that you can get beaten here in a lot of different ways. And I think he has good value if somebody told him that, right? What scares me a little bit is the amount that this line has climbed since they went live. It makes me feel like, and I did talk very briefly with Rick ahead of the pod here. I feel like that feels like something got leaked from one of the camps, right? Like somebody knows something that the other camp doesn't know, or bookies know something that we don't know yet, and it's not as obvious, as to why that would climb so high. Now, all that said, I also think they're factoring in that Craig is older by nearly 10 years, right? Not only that, Allen's got a 4 or 5 fight win streak, and Allen picks fights incredibly well, which I think, unfortunate for the lines here, I think that actually factors way too heavily in this fight. So again, I think there's clear value on Craig here based on the resume and the opponent strength that has happened over the last 10 months, 18 months, because I think he showed better against Muniz. And I think a lot of other fights that you could pull into this and say just resume-wise, Craig probably has a legitimate shot at being a very, very highly valued underdog here, right? And we saw that earlier, with a couple of fights against Allen where the underdog, really put it to him, right? So Curtis being one of them, right? I mean, that Curtis fight, I think Curtis was a ridiculous underdog in that. Something like I don't remember the number, but it was like 230 or something like that on that fight. And that was closing. I think it opened even further apart on that. And, he handed him his ass. So from that perspective, I would say there are some historical things that probably factor heavily here from my perspective that didn't factor into the actual lines on this. And I just think it's one of those things that you're right. He is a better striker, but he's not the best striker. And my biggest concern with this fight is where does he go afterwards, right? He's perennially going to be in, 9 to 13 ranking. There's 5 guys ahead of him that just steamroll him, at least, right? Maybe even 6 or 7 guys ahead of him in the rankings in middleweight that just steamroll him no matter what the outcome is here, right? And I just feel like at 35-ish or whatever he is, 36 years old, Craig has an impetus to really throw it out all on the line, right? And so I don't see him breaking an arm like he did to Jamal Hill. Sorry about that, Andy. I know Jamal is your boy, but I definitely could see something weird happening, right? Where it's like you slip up once, Craig will bite you, dude. I mean, he's definitely not a guy that is going to get knocked out easily. And, judging on some of the older fights, unfortunately, because I think, and I'm rambling here at this point, I think Allen picks fights so well and signs contracts so well on fights since the Curtis fight that you almost have to pull those out of the equation because he stylistically matched up so perfectly in those last 4 or 5 fights that I just think matchmaking was so good there on his end. I don't think that matchmaking is as good on this one. I think stylistically on the ground and especially in the lower, quarters of this matchup, Craig has an advantage here that isn't being reflected. So we'll see, of course, right? I mean, he's 10 years older almost, but damn, that fight resume is ridiculous. And, Craig has zero fear. He doesn't care. And he knows a guy like this isn't a one-punch knockout for him, right? So, I mean, the other way around. He's not going to get knocked out by one punch, right? So he has a 1-inch reach advantage, 1-inch leg advantage. I just see the striking being better than what it is on paper. Again, not saying he's a good striker, not saying that's an even matchup on striking. I'm just saying one slip up at an extra inch probably makes a big difference in a fight like this. But, man, I'm actually looking real forward to this fight. I thought this fight card was pretty crap, to be honest. But this fight looks really cool. So,
I think this is going to be a really good one, too. So Ben's with me on Paul Craig at plus 350.
Well,
Rick's
actually,
got under 1.5 and minus 110.
I'll clarify that real quick, Andy. I didn't take a bet like that here. I think the inside the distance numbers as they come out might be a good play. I think I locked in a half unit personally on a flyer on Craig because I think he's got the potential to win that. But I wouldn't go out telling everybody in all of my friends and family to go bet on Craig on this fight, right? I lean very slightly Allen with the caveat that Allen's last 4 or 5 fights have been really heavily match made. So,
yeah, I mean, Rick's got under 1.5. I think inside the distance would be absurdly priced, unfortunately. But I do think I'm with you. I am going to tell everybody to bet on Paul Craig, man. Just because I think that it's such good value. But yeah, totally agree with your analysis. Rick, any closing thoughts to send us on our way here?
Yeah, my closing thought, and I'll keep it brief, is the odds. When Paul Craig fought Andre Muniz recently, both this year, they both fought Andre Muniz this year, as we mentioned. The odds when Paul Craig fought Andre Muniz, he was plus 185. When Brendan Allen fought him, he was plus 175. So MMA odds or MMA math, you would say that they're about even or so. Obviously, that's matchup based, and there's so much more that factors into that. I understand that. But minus 450 feels a little sharp, feels a little steep. So I'm with you guys in the sense that there's value on Craig. I think Allen runs away with it here personally. I think he's able to finish him, but I would not be shocked if he got stuck in an armbar. Not in the slightest. So I'll go under 1.5. Yeah.
I can say I'm going to be stoked not losing a ton of money like I did on 295 because I'm not making massive bets on this. But I can also say, I would be okay with either. Right, I feel like all the guys ahead of them in middleweight are just such a class higher than both of them right now, and for different reasons. But it's almost a non-event whoever wins this, because the next 25 months are going to suck for them.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of close out our analysis on this one, is like the significance of this card. Sometimes you get some fight nights that have significance on the future rankings, and this is not one of them, unfortunately. I think this is going to be a card that offers some really good value on underdogs. I think this is going to be a card that offers some interesting matchups and some fun fights. But the actual impact on the grand scheme of MMA and the MMA world and the rankings world, that is to be determined. And that's for y'all to determine. So drop a comment below, leave us a like, make sure to give us a subscribe, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at RickHA Sports, at AndyHA Sports. We'll be tweeting out some more stuff as the week goes along. And stay tuned as we continue to drop more content for you. We've got the Sharpen the Public podcast coming out later this week, which you can also find on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. And yeah, I think that's it. So appreciate you all listening. Hope that this format was solid for you guys as it was for us, where we're able to shine some light on the fights that we're looking forward to in the prelims, and then really break down the main card the best we can. So I'm Andy signing off. That's Rick. That is our good man, Ben. And appreciate you all listening. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.